Her to be put in a grave like that, and she didn't deserve my baby didn't deserve any of that.
Learning more about a mother found buried in the Arizona desert. Police say that she was killed while out on a first date.
A lot of questions about what happened to 21-year-old Arianna Jones, but the question they want answered the most is why.
He buried the concrete bags before he ever picked her up for their date. Think about that for a second. While Arianna Jones was getting ready, picking out an outfit, excited for a first date with someone she'd met online, the man she was about to meet had already driven out to a remote patch of Arizona desert and prepped a grave. She had no idea. And that's the part of this case that still makes people sick. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this is Crime Files. And if true crime stories like this keep you up at night the way they do for me, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and like this video. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories, and telling them right. So let's talk about who Arianna actually was. Because before she's remembered as a headline, a case number, or a statistic in some article about online dating dangers, she was a person, a daughter, a mother, someone with a whole life behind her that shaped who she became. Arianna Bailey Jones was 21 years old, living in Glendale, Arizona. She was a mom to a 2-year-old son. And by every account from the people who knew her, she adored that little boy completely. But her path to that point wasn't easy. Arianna was adopted at just 3 years old. She spent years moving between different homes growing up, the kind of unstable childhood that shapes a person in ways most of us can't fully understand unless we've lived it. Kids who grow up like that often spend their whole lives just looking for something steady, somewhere to belong. At 18, Arianna got something back that a lot of people in her position never do. She reconnected with her biological mother, Sophia Sardinas. They rebuilt their relationship from the ground up. Her mother later said, through tears, that all Arianna ever wanted was to have a family, to be a mom, to be loved, to build a kind of stable life she didn't get to have as a child. She had her son. She had her mother back in her life. She was, by every measure, someone who was trying. That's the person we need to hold on to as we go through what happened next. Because it's easy in true crime storytelling to let the victim disappear behind the crime. Arianna doesn't deserve that. She was a young mother building a life, and none of what's coming was something she saw coming. Like a lot of people her age, Arianna met someone through social media. His name was Domonic Rodolico, 24 years old. The two of them talked online for a while, and according to court documents, they exchanged only a handful of phone calls before deciding to meet up in person for the first time. I want you to really sit with that detail, because it's such a familiar situation. Millions of people do exactly this every single day. It's not reckless. It's normal. It's how an entire generation dates now. And that's exactly what makes this case so unsettling. On July 5th, 2026, Rodolico picked Arianna up from her apartment. On the surface, it was about as low-key as a first date gets. They drove to a Harkins movie theater that night. Arriving around 9 p.m., surveillance cameras caught them together on their way out afterward, each of them holding a souvenir concession cup, looking like any other young couple leaving a movie. If you'd seen that footage without knowing what came next, you wouldn't have thought twice about it. And that's really what makes this case so hard to sit with. There's no dramatic red flag in that footage. No visible tension. No argument. Nothing that would have made a bystander pause. Arianna wasn't careless. She did what millions of people do every week. She agreed to meet someone in a public place, somewhere with cameras, somewhere with people around. On paper, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. That's the advice everyone gives. But here's what Arianna didn't know. And this is the detail that turns this whole story cold. Investigators later discovered that earlier that same day, hours before he ever knocked on her door, Rodolico had already driven out to a remote, secluded desert location near Lake Pleasant, well north of the city. He stayed out there for a while. Then he turned around, drove back into town, and picked Arianna up like it was any other evening. He sat across from her at the movies. He carried a drink out to the car with her. And the entire time, according to what investigators would later piece together, he already had a plan. 2 days passed. Arianna's family hadn't heard from her, which wasn't like her at all. When her mother finally went to check on her apartment, what she found there marked the beginning of every parent's worst nightmare. Sophia found Arianna's dog alone inside its kennel. No food, no water, clearly left unattended for days. Anyone who knew Arianna knew that wasn't something she would ever do. She loved that dog. Something was very wrong, and Sophia felt it immediately. The family called police on July 7th. A friend of Arianna's told officers that she'd mentioned plans to meet someone for a movie 2 nights before. That single detail became the thread investigators needed to start pulling. Detectives moved quickly, digging into cell phone records and surveillance footage from around the city. That's how Domonic Rodolico's name entered the case. As they traced his movements alongside Arianna's phone activity that night, a picture started to form, and it was disturbing. After the movie ended, the two of them hadn't simply gone home. Cell tower data showed they returned to that same remote desert area near Lake Pleasant, not once, but twice more that night. And during that final visit, Arianna's phone simply disconnected from the network. It just stopped. 10 minutes later, records showed Rodolico's phone leaving the area. Alone, picture what that timeline actually means. A movie theater full of people. A drive out of the city, into the dark, towards somewhere secluded, then back into town, only to return again. And again, each trip taking them further from anyone who could help her, further from cameras, further from witnesses. To investigators, that back-and-forth pattern didn't look random. We don't know exactly what was said in that car during those drives, and we're never going to pretend to know. But the geography alone, laid out in cell tower pings, tells a story that's hard to read any other way. For days, none of this was known to Arianna's family. All they knew was that she was missing, and that not knowing is its own kind of torture. Sophia printed flyers. She walked the streets asking anyone if they'd seen her daughter. She later said something that stuck with people following the story, that she wanted the world to know who her daughter actually was, not just reduce her to what happened to her. On July 11th, that hope ran out. Cadaver dogs led investigators to a shallow grave in that same desert area. And when the scene was processed, what they found there practically told the whole story on its own. 2 Harkin souvenir cups, matching the ones from the surveillance footage. Bags of concrete mix. Latex gloves. A bra. A hair accessory that matched one Arianna had been photographed wearing that night. Pieces of a condom wrapper. And on one of the concrete bags, investigators noted something particularly chilling, a reddish substance with an eyelash strip stuck to it. Rodolico was arrested that same day. And here's a detail that says a lot about where his head was at. When police found him, he wasn't grieving, he wasn't searching for her. He was in the middle of cleaning out the back of his own car. At first, Rodolico gave police a story. He claimed he and Arianna had been jumped in the desert by 2 unknown men, that these strangers had attacked and stabbed her, and that he'd escaped while she didn't. He told detectives he believed she was, in his words, probably not alive after that happened. But if that were true, the natural human response is to call 911 immediately. He did none of that. Instead, he drove home and started wiping down his trunk. When detectives pushed back, his account started collapsing. He admitted the 2 attackers' story wasn't true. Then he offered another version, that some unidentified man had instructed him to bring Arianna out to the desert that night, but that he claimed not to know she was going to be killed. He couldn't explain who this man was or how they'd supposedly been in contact. And when detectives asked him directly whether he had killed her, he hesitated, looked down at the floor, and said no. Investigators didn't buy it. Between the surveillance footage, the digital trail, and the physical evidence recovered at the burial site, they had more than enough to build a case. Prosecutors later described it plainly in court, calling it a very premeditated and horrific homicide. Digging deeper into Rodolico's background only added more unsettling context. Court records revealed he was already on probation at the time of Arianna's death, tied to a prior conviction for impersonating a gas station employee and stealing money from registers at 2 separate stores a year before. That case involved him posing as an employee at a Quick Trip along Peoria Avenue, taking around $200 from a register, then doing the same thing at another Quick Trip location. He was sentenced on that charge and placed on 2 years of probation, classified as non-dangerous at the time. Less than a year later, he was facing a first-degree murder charge. He wasn't a stranger to the criminal justice system, and reporting on his background also noted a difficult upbringing of his own. Court records show his father, stepfather, and brother all have criminal histories. He reported witnessing domestic violence as a child and said he'd used marijuana, cocaine, and mushrooms as a teenager. A forensic psychologist who reviewed the case said this kind of pattern, prior criminal conduct combined with family history of criminal activity, can reflect a willingness to engage in impulsive behavior and can sometimes narrow the gap between lesser offenses and something far more violent. That's not a diagnosis, and it's not an excuse. It's context. And context matters here, because so much of what makes this case disturbing is the gap between who Rodolico appeared to be on a first date and what investigators say he was actually capable of. Domonic Rodolico is now facing first-degree premeditated murder charges, along with an additional charge for abandoning and concealing a body. He's being held on a $2 million cash-only bond. He has pleaded not guilty, and a trial date has now been set for March. As of the most recent updates in this case, Arianna's exact cause of death still hasn't been publicly released. That determination remains with the medical examiner's office. And the motive, the actual reason behind all of this, remains unknown, even to the investigators who spent weeks building this case. What's left in the aftermath is a family trying to hold itself together around a hole that will never fully close. Arianna's great-uncle put it about as simply and painfully as anyone could. Her son is never going to know who his mother really was. He'll grow up hearing stories about her, instead of living them with her. She was 21 years old. She was a mother who had already survived so much before this, who was actively working to build the stable, loving life she hadn't always had growing up, and she never got the chance to finish building it. Nearly a month after her death, Arianna's family and friends gathered to celebrate her life. People who knew her talked about the kind of mother she was, how much she loved her little boy, how hard she worked to give him a good life despite everything she'd been through herself. It's a small moment in the grand scope of this case, but it matters. It's a reminder that behind every arrest, every court date, every headline, there's a family still showing up for someone who's gone. So I want to ask you something, because this is really the part of the story that deserves genuine discussion, not just outrage. What kind of person is capable of planning something like this before they've even met the other person face to face, driving out and preparing a burial site hours ahead of what was supposed to be a first date? What does that level of premeditation tell us about someone who can then sit across from that same person at a movie theater, act completely normal, share a drink, and carry on like nothing is wrong, all while already knowing what he intends to do? And more broadly, what does a case like this tell us about the real, is statistically rare, risks that come with meeting people from the internet? Even when everything about the interaction feels calm, casual, and completely ordinary right up until it isn't? If this case affected you the way it affected me while researching it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see justice followed through for Arianna, and you want more cases like hers covered with the care and accuracy they deserve, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Files with notifications turned on so you don't miss what comes next.